The Maryland campaign of September 1862, which featured the horrific Battle of Antietam on September 17th, ranks among the most gripping military operations of the American Civil War. Confederate General Robert E. Lee moved into Maryland on the heels of his impressive win at the Battle of Second Bull Run in late August 1862, while Major George B. McClellan recently returned to the limelight after a fumbling effort during the 7 Days campaign outside Richmond, was in Washington, D.C., trying to put together an Army of the Potomac that would confront Lee as he moved north. Lee hoped that his march into the United States would enable him to maintain the strategic initiative while also reaping a logistical bounty from Western Pennsylvania, and then he hoped from the Cumberland Valley in Pennsylvania. He and most other Confederates believed that the appearance of the Army of Northern Virginia would also embolden Marylanders to embrace the nascent Southern Republic, and maybe even a lot of men from Maryland to join the Army. They believed Maryland, a slaveholding state that had remained in the United States, was being held in the Union against its will, basically, and they viewed themselves as liberators. Confederate success on Union soil hoped many Confederates might hurt Republicans in the autumn elections in the United States, and some also hoped that success in this campaign might prompt leaders in London and Paris to move Great Britain and France toward official diplomatic recognition of the Confederacy. Robert E. Lee didn't hope that, but many in the Confederacy did. On the U.S. side, Abraham Lincoln saw Lee's invasion as both a threat and an opportunity. With elections looming in November, the Republican administration could not tolerate a rebel army north of the Potomac for very long. But Lincoln reckoned that as Lee marched farther and farther away from his Virginia sources of supply, his army would become increasingly vulnerable. The president hoped that McClellan, whose previous record included little evidence of aggressive proclivities, would make Lee pay dearly for his decision to take the war out of Virginia and into the United States. I'm sure that everyone in this audience tonight understands the sequence that unfolded rapidly. It's well known to everyone interested in the Civil War. I'll just spend a few minutes on it. Lee he crossed the Potomac, divided his army while it was in Frederick, Maryland, which is about 45 miles north of Washington. He sent the bulk of the army under Major General Stonewall Jackson to capture Harper's Ferry, and directed the remainder to march deeper into Maryland toward Hagerstown. Lee would accompany that second part of the army. Shortly thereafter, leaving Frederick, a copy of his blueprint for the entire campaign, contained in Special Orders number 191, fell into McClellan's hands, an incredible piece of good luck for McClellan. And McClellan actually bestirred himself to press the invaders. While Jackson laid siege to Harper's Ferry, McClellan's army forced Lee's defenders out of the gaps in South Mountain, east of Frederick, in sharp fighting on September 14th. Lee briefly thought about withdrawing back to Virginia, but then he decided to concentrate his army near Sharpsburg, a village just across the Potomac River in Maryland, near the western slope of South Mountain and about 18 miles north of Harper's Ferry. McClellan let 2 days go by, the 15th and 16th, without pushing harder against Lee. But Harper's Ferry and its 12,500 defenders surrendered to Jackson on the 15th. That freed Jackson to hasten to Lee's support. This surrender in Harper's Ferry was the second largest of United States troops in all of our history. Only the loss of the Philippines in 1942 yielded more U.S. POWs. It's a major surrender in Harper's Ferry. The climactic clash of the campaign, as you all know, came on the 17th of September at Antietam, which produced more than 23,000 casualties in the war's bloodiest single day in United States history.
Mark wants to know, A.P. Hill's arrival on the scene saved Lee's army. Would the war have ended that day if Hill had not arrived when he did?
A.P. Hill did save the Army at Antietam. And yes, Lee was absolutely on the ropes. I don't think Lee should have stayed north of the Potomac. I think there was nothing for him to gain at Antietam. He was badly outnumbered. His army was in terrible shape, as I've talked about. This is an example of his really fundamentally pugnacious approach to being a general. A.P. Hill saved the Army by pushing his division on that 18-mile march from Harper's Ferry to the battlefield, pushed it so hard that half of them fell out of the ranks. They only got there with about 2,500 men, but they came in at just the right point, at just the right time, and staved off a disastrous ending to the day. The Federals were about to get control of the road to Bowler's Ford. And if they had gotten control of that, they would have isolated Lee's army north of the Potomac. And I think it was one of the few times during the war when one major army had a legitimate chance, literally, to destroy another major army. In terms of why is it so important to hold the field, all I can know is what they write. What they wrote is that affirmed their valor and their sense of purpose and their bravery to say that in the face of, and the Federals did it too. It's not just Confederates. Just we're talking about the Confederate example here. We were hammered and battered by a powerful enemy, and we held the ground. And not only did we hold it on the 17th, we stayed a whole extra day and invited them to attack us again, and they didn't even attack us. And then we got back across the river, and they still didn't attack us. So we must have really damaged them by all that strong work we did on the day when we held the field. That's basically their